Hello, everyone. Go ahead and go into your social studies notebook and go to slide number 50, the Great Wall of China. Now, looking at this map, you're going to notice it was built before the Qin Dynasty. This is where that light yellow is going to be. I'll zoom in a little bit more. You can see the yellow. It's pretty expansive, but there's a lot of broken sections. This was because during the Warring States, we have a lot of infighting between the people who live there. And so they were mostly focused on protecting their part of ancient China, not really focusing on protecting China as a whole. Now, around the Qin dynasty is where we start to unify the wall and make a separate wall. You're going to notice the orange lines. They're still broken up, but they still follow a relatively simple path. There are some breakages, such as around the rivers, because it is easier to protect against around a river, I should say. Now, this is what remains of it today. It is a single section, so a lot of these sections have now gone into disrepair. Also, it is brick, which we're going to learn about was not what was used until a very long time afterwards. So whereas this is going to kind of fade away and decompose, the brick sections are going to remain pretty standard. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to watch this video. I'm trying not to show you the answers because I've already filled them in. And there are 4 steps that lead into building the Great Wall of China. We're going to break it down together. I wonder if we'll get an ad.
If you guys have not heard of Grammarly, then you are truly missing out because Grammarly is a digital writing.
This wall is so long that when it was being operated 400 years ago, guards in towers at the east end of the wall would witness the sunrise 1 hour and 20 minutes before guards at the western end of the same wall would witness the same event.
So, from what he's saying, a guard here, so on the western, would see the sunrise an hour and a half later than if they were positioned on the eastern side of the wall. That is how long the wall is.
Visitors to China are familiar with the famous brick wall. Built in the 1500s to defend against the Mongol hordes. But its origin started much earlier as sun-baked mud. Terrifying forces drove its creation and explain why and how the Great Wall was first built. We have to go back over 2,200 years and deep into the wilderness to find remnants of the longest wall built to defend ancient China. Only fragments remain. Once, this was one of the most disputed parts of Asia, a battleground for the Chinese. And raiders from modern Mongolia, known as the Xiongnu.
Xiongnu were famed as horse archers, a brutal raiding force of hard-riding men who struck terror into the hearts of the enemy.
To pursue or engage them often led to disaster.
Horse archers were the ideal troops for harassing attacks. They could come as if from nowhere, appearing suddenly. It was true terror tactics.
The Xiongnu were warrior nomads in the land north of China. They were the ancestors of Genghis Khan and the Mongols. And with their superb mastery of the horse and deadly composite bow, they revolutionized warfare and forced the great Chinese Empire to adopt a radical new strategy.
They decided to build a wall, a complex linear fortress.
Nomads from the north posed a realistic military threat. Every emperor soon learned that the length of his job would depend on managing the frontier well.
Notice that's kind of the mandate of heaven. Can you protect the people? If you can't, the gods are showing their displeasure, and you have to be kicked out.
But over 2 millennia ago, how did they make a wall in a desert?
This is a replica of the rammed earth wall. It's at once wonderfully simple and yet wonderfully sophisticated. Look at this frame, for instance. The top of the frame allows you perfect alignment to get that wall running exactly where you want it across the landscape. I also use these reeds, so bundles of reeds that were layered in between the rammed earth.
Pounding in the reeds binds the earth together, making a tough, solid wall.
It's simple and yet sophisticated. It's a wonderful design.
So, we just learned how they built the wall. Think about it in your head, what the 4 steps would be. Now, the first thing he said to do.
How did they make a wall in a desert?
This is a replica of the rammed earth wall. It's at once wonderfully simple and yet wonderfully sophisticated. Look at this frame, for instance. The top of the frame allows you perfect alignment.
So first step, build and set up your alignment frame so that you don't have gaps in your wall. It's kind of really pointless to have a protective wall if there's gaps that people can get through. You then don't really need a wall. So where it says number 1, set up alignment wall.
To get that wall running exactly where you want it across the landscape. I also use these reeds, so bundles of reeds that were layered in between the rammed earth.
So this one is kind of tricky. He says he takes bundles of layered reeds to put in between the rammed earth. So the next step is technically to put rammed earth down. So 2 would be put rammed clay or earth down is number 2. Then number 3 is layer bundles of reeds. I know, confusing.
Pounding in the reeds binds the earth together, making a tough, solid wall.
And then you would bind it by pounding in the reeds to the earth. So you would get, oops. One, place the wall alignment frame. 2, stack rammed clay/mud. I'll say /earth because that's the word he used. 3, layer bundle of reeds. 4, pound the reeds into the clay and you repeat the process. Now, because of where they're situated on this map, this was incredibly sufficient for the most part because you have the Gobi Desert over here. So you're not going to have a lot of people going over here. You can't go through it because it is so thick and pounded in together. We talked about around on this side, so you can't go around on this side. You have lesser mountains. Let's see, the wall ends over here. You have a giant body of water you need to get around. So you have natural barriers on the ends. You can't go through. So if you can't go through, you can't go around. You're going to have watchtowers, so you can't go under. The only option for invaders was to go over. Now, we're going to learn how they made that hard too. For understanding The human head is about the same consistency and thickness as a watermelon. That doesn't really make sense to you now, but it will.
It's simple and yet sophisticated. It's a wonderful design.
And this reconstructed section is only a third of the size of the original walls. They changed the landscape, standing 20 feet tall.
So, to go over them, you would have to climb 20 feet. 20 feet is about a 2-story building.
These defenses focused on blocking strategic weak points, vulnerable passes and valleys. It evolved over 400 years and stretched for 6,000 miles. But this wasn't just a simple barrier. It was an entire protection and communications network, expertly designed to resist attack.
One of the many defense systems is this perimeter forest of porcupine spikes. Look how unpleasant they are. You'd have to send very brave men in.
Attacking troops would have to clear the spikes in order to climb and breach the wall.
But while they're being cleared, men up there are shooting down at you.
So, you would have these porcupine spikes lining the enemy side of the wall, which are horrible to have to try to weave your way through just to climb onto the wall. And while you are just getting towards the wall and while you are climbing this 20-foot tall wall, you have archers who are at the top shooting down at you, throwing rocks at you. So trying to make you lose your grip so that you would fall onto this bed of spikes. So it was very well protected. Now, we're going to talk about how this transferred into the wall you know it as today. Because guaranteed, if you go to China, you're not expecting to see the mud and reed wall. We'll get another ad. Oh, we won't.
A 13,000-mile dragon of earth and stone winds its way through the countryside of China with a history almost as long and serpentine as its structure. The Great Wall began as multiple walls of rammed earth built by individual feudal states during the Chunqiu period to protect against nomadic raiders north of China and each other. When Emperor Qin Shi Huang unified the states in 221 BCE, the Tibetan Plateau and Pacific Ocean became natural barriers, but the mountains in the north remained vulnerable to Mongol, Turkish, and Xiongnu invasions. To defend against them, the emperor expanded the small walls built by his predecessors, connecting some and fortifying others. As the structures grew from Lingtao in the west to Liaodong in the east, they collectively became known as the Long Wall. To accomplish this task, the emperor enlisted soldiers and commoners, not always voluntarily. Of the hundreds of thousands of builders recorded during the Qin dynasty, many were forcibly conscripted peasants, and others were criminals serving out sentences. Under the Han dynasty, the wall grew longer still, reaching 3,700 miles and spanning from Dunhuang to the Bohai Sea. Forced labor continued under the Han Emperor Han Wudi, and the wall's reputation grew into a notorious place of suffering. Poems and legends of the time told of laborers buried in nearby mass graves, or even within the wall itself. And while no human remains have been found inside, grave pits do indicate that many workers died from accidents, hunger, and exhaustion. The wall was formidable, but not invincible. Both Genghis and his son Kublai Khan managed to surmount the wall during the Mongol invasion of the 13th century. After the Ming dynasty gained control in 1368, they began to refortify and further consolidate the wall, using bricks and stones from local kilns. Averaging 23 feet high and 21 feet wide, the wall's 5,500 miles were punctuated by watchtowers. When raiders were sighted, fire and smoke signals traveled between towers until reinforcements arrived.
You might have remember
Small
that from
openings
Mulan.
along the wall let archers fire on invaders, while larger ones were used to drop stones and more. But even this new and improved wall was not enough. In 1644, northern Manchu clans overthrew the Ming to establish the Qing dynasty, incorporating Mongolia as well. Thus, for the second time, China was ruled by the very people the wall had tried to keep out. With the empire's borders now extending beyond the Great Wall, the fortifications lost their purpose. And without regular reinforcement, the wall fell into disrepair. Rammed earth eroded, while brick and stone were plundered for building materials. But its job wasn't finished. During World War II, China used sections for defense against Japanese invasion, and some parts are still rumored to be used for military training. But the wall's main purpose today is cultural. As one of the largest man-made structures on Earth, it was granted UNESCO World Heritage status in 1987. Originally built to keep people out of China, the Great Wall now welcomes millions of visitors each year. In fact, the influx of tourists has caused the wall to deteriorate, leading the Chinese government to launch preservation initiatives. It's also often acclaimed as the only man-made structure visible from space. Unfortunately, that's not at all true. In low Earth orbit, all sorts of structures like bridges, highways, and airports are visible, and the Great Wall is only barely discernible. From the moon, it doesn't stand a chance. But regardless, it's the Earth we should be studying it from, because new sections are still discovered every few years, branching off from the main body and expanding this remarkable monument to human achievement.
Awesome. Hope you learned something new about the Great Wall of China, and I will see you guys